why they found a greater sense of purpose after the White House is they figured out how to align who they were with what they did next. And the consistent thread is each one of them doubled down on something that they were dogmatically principled about.
Accidental presidents, I learned so much because that's a weird circumstance as well. You're sitting there as the vice president one moment, and John Gardner, I think it wasn't worth more than a bucket of, and we cleansed it up and called it spit. And then boom, you're the leader of the free world. And those stories were very intriguing. This is different. You know, Reagan said in his book, The American Life, he said that, wow, I got endless number of phone calls and messages. The day I left Washington, I was down to, I think the dry cleaner said I had to go pick up something in Santa Barbara. Bush, in the last couple of pages of his book, he writes about taking his dog out for a walk. And of course, you have to curb your dog in the residential area he's living in Houston. And so he's down on his knees with a plastic baggie on his hand, cleaning the dog poo from his dog. And he's just letting people know that he went from being the American president, leader of the free world, and now he's on his knees taking care of his leader, which happens to be his dog. And so you know the story there. I guess what I would say to you that is always fascinating to me about these people is, how do they see themselves? I know how you see them. I know how I see them. But when you do the homework on these people, how do they see themselves, Jared?
So, Anthony, this is one of my favorite parts about writing presidential history, is you get to try to really get in the head of these, great leaders who've been deceased for a long period of time. It's almost like, what you hear about actors doing, right? So Daniel Day-Lewis, before he plays Lincoln, he, spends multiple years like getting in the brain of Abraham Lincoln. And that's one of, I find, the most interesting, and it can also be kind of a torturing experience writing these books. But look, I think it varies. These are 7 very different men that I wrote about. And, to sort of begin where we left off, George W. Bush is unique to any other president in the sense that he has this ability to live life as a chapter guy, right? So when one chapter is done, he just completely detaches and moves on. He's not at all introspective. He feels like you can't long for what you can't have. He tells me when it's over, and he doesn't miss it. And frankly, I believe him. That bothers people who are critical of him, but that's who he is. But then you look at somebody like Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Jefferson, this is a man who just personality-wise, he was what we would today describe as a serial entrepreneur or a serial founder. And at a very, very young age, he was a co-founder of the United States. And he was well aware that he had built a sort of republic business that, had many, many flaws that they couldn't get around to patching up or weren't right to patch up. And he had deep, deep anxiety as one of the last living founding fathers that if they didn't train the next generation to improve the product wouldn't last. And so after writing the Declaration of Independence and the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, he wanted to finish the 3rd volume of his life trilogy and found the university, the first arts and sciences university in the country to do this, which became known as the University of Virginia. The problem is, like any founder, he got saddled with obligations, right? They needed him to be vice president. They needed him to be Secretary of State. They needed him to be president twice. And he lost very valuable years. Those were not things that he wanted to do. He wanted to get on to found the next thing. And the poor guy at 82 years old, Anthony, this is my favorite story in the book. At 82 years old, a frail Thomas Jefferson opens the doors of the University of Virginia, and within months, students cover their faces in masks in kind of like an 1825 example of social media anonymity, and they start rioting through the campus that he personally designed and architected, chanting, "Down with European professors." And they take bags of urine and throw it at the professors. They beat another professor with the cane, and in sort of a twisted show of Southern honor, none of them will give each other up. So Jefferson, who's the rector of the university, calls an all-school assembly the next day for all the students to meet before the disciplinary committee. And the disciplinary committee for the University of Virginia in 1825 was Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe, the most intimidating disciplinary committee, past, present, and future. And so Jefferson stands up to address the students, and he starts bawling, hysterically crying. And so these students, they're so awestruck by this man that they revere, just being inconsolable. And at James Madison, all of 5'1", tells Jefferson to sit down, and he can't get a word out of his mouth before the students one by one confess. And this is the kind of man that Thomas Jefferson was. And each one of these presidents, I think part of why they found a greater sense of purpose after the White House is they figured out how to align who they were with what they did next. And the consistent thread, there's not a lot of consistent threads across all of them because they each did it in different ways. But the consistent thread is each one of them doubled down on something that they were dogmatically principled about.
Listen, it's fascinating. Jefferson, quite the life, got into a big political rub and row with John Adams. Of course, they became very famous pen pals and reconnected as friends years on in life. And then they famously died on the 50th anniversary of our birth on the 4th of July. I believe it was in 1826, although I can't remember who died first. Sort of feel like Adams outlived Jefferson, but I can't remember if that's the case.